aliens shocked. They made a weapon out of what? What if the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't made of metal or energy, but grown from the ground? What if the weapon you feared wasn't something you could touch, but something alive, something organic? What if the most powerful force in the universe wasn't created by technology, but by nature itself? In the farthest corners of the galaxy, there are civilizations who have mastered technology beyond our wildest dreams. They have built empires that stretched across the stars, defeating anyone who dares to stand in their way. These civilizations have conquered planets, destroyed entire species, and bent the forces of nature to their will. Nothing has ever been able to challenge their power, or so they thought, until one day something happened. Something that would change everything. An ancient weapon long forgotten was discovered. A weapon unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Not made of metal, not powered by machines. Instead, it was something alive, something that seemed to grow and change on its own. To those who found it, it was unlike anything they could understand. It was organic, strange, and most importantly, dangerous. This was no ordinary weapon. This was a force of nature. The aliens who found it had already conquered countless worlds. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single blast. They had machines that could level mountains. But this weapon, it was different. At first, they didn't know what to make of it. It looked harmless, like a simple plant. But something about it felt wrong. Something about it felt powerful. It was a mystery. News of this discovery spread quickly. The alien researchers who examined it were both excited and fearful. They had never seen anything like it before. They didn't know if it could be controlled, if it could be used as a weapon, or if it could destroy everything they had built. The questions grew, and so did the fear. Could this plant, this weapon, be the one thing that could challenge their empire? Could it be the thing that could bring down even their most advanced technology? Could it change the entire course of history? What made it even more unsettling was the fact that the weapon didn't seem to follow the rules. Unlike any weapon they had ever seen, it didn't behave the way they expected. It didn't act like metal or energy. It was unpredictable, shifting in ways they couldn't explain. And the more they studied it, the more they realized they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. This was not just a weapon, it was a force. A force that could change everything. As the aliens began to investigate further, the tension grew. What had they uncovered? What was this strange organic weapon? And what could it mean for the galaxy? They were about to find out the hard way. The discovery of the weapon sent shockwaves through the alien empire. For a species that had mastered every form of destruction, finding something so unexpected was a wake-up call. Their entire understanding of power was being tested. They had never seen anything like it before. What they thought they knew about weapons, about control, was suddenly in question. This wasn't just a tool for destruction, it was something more. But what? The species in question, let's call them the Xithari, had built their empire over thousands of years. Their technology was unmatched. They had weapons capable of destroying entire cities, annihilating entire fleets of ships with a single strike. Their cities were perfect, their military forces unbeatable. No one dared challenge them. The Xithari had conquered countless worlds, bringing entire populations under their control. Power was their only currency. Their empire stretched across the galaxy, and nothing had ever been able to stop them. But now, they had found something that could break them. It all began when a small research team, led by top scientists and military minds, was dispatched to investigate an ancient ruin on a forgotten planet. The planet had been abandoned for centuries. Most of the empire had written it off, a relic of a civilization long gone. But something had called to the Xithari, a signal, faint but undeniable. A report came in that suggested there might be something of importance hidden within the old ruins. It wasn't much, but the Xithari always took reports seriously. They never ignored a potential advantage. The team landed on the planet. It was an old, desolate world, dusty and barren, with jagged rocks and long-forgotten structures half buried in the sand. The air was thin, the atmosphere cold. This was a place that had seen better days, a place that felt abandoned even by time itself. The team trekked through the ruins, their boots crunching on the dry earth, scanning everything with their advanced equipment. The structures were crumbling, but they were still magnificent in their own way. It was clear that a long-forgotten civilization had once thrived here. But now, all that remained were echoes of the past. As the team pushed deeper into the ruins, something caught the eye of one of the lead researchers, Zor. It wasn't the large stone structures or the faint carvings on the walls. It was a small, strange object nestled beneath a pile of rubble. Zor knelt down and carefully pulled away the debris, revealing what seemed to be a bulb-like object. At first glance, it looked harmless, a seed, a pod, or perhaps something biological. It was dark green, almost black, and it pulsed faintly with an eerie organic glow. The material didn't appear to be metal or stone. It seemed alive. Zor picked it up carefully, examining it through his equipment. "It's not metal, not stone," he muttered. "It's organic, but it feels like it has a purpose." The rest of the team gathered around, intrigued but cautious. The object didn't seem to pose any immediate threat, but they couldn't shake the feeling that it was something far more than what it appeared to be. They were accustomed to finding strange artifacts during their expeditions, but this was different. This was alive, and that alone made it dangerous. The team made contact with their superiors back at the Xithari command center. They sent a full report, detailing the strange object they had found. Within hours, the Xithari High Command had mobilized an entire research and military task force to investigate the discovery. They needed to know what this thing was, and, more importantly, what it could do. The Xithari had learned long ago that the unknown was something to fear. And this was unknown in every sense of the word. As the days passed, the object was brought back to the main research facility. The team of scientists and military officers worked around the clock to study it. The first thing they noticed was that the object was growing. It wasn't just sitting there inert, it was moving, expanding, slowly, almost imperceptibly. It seemed to react to its environment, drawing energy from its surroundings. But what was it doing with that energy? No one could say. There was no sign of any obvious mechanism. No buttons, no wires, no power source. It was completely self-contained. More troubling still was its resistance to their usual methods of analysis. The Xithari had technology capable of scanning and dissecting nearly anything they encountered: materials, energy sources, even living organisms. But this object? It resisted every scan. It didn't respond to the standard forms of analysis. Instead of breaking down into data that they could understand, it seemed to absorb it. Every attempt to probe deeper into its nature seemed to make it stronger, more resilient. Whatever this thing was, it was not like anything the Xithari had ever encountered. "It's almost like it's alive," one of the senior researchers, Viezil, said, her voice tinged with both awe and fear. "But it's not. It can't be. This shouldn't be possible." The more they studied it, the more they realized how little they actually understood. The object wasn't reacting in a way that fit with anything the Xithari knew. It wasn't responding to energy or matter in any way they recognized. It was almost as if it had its own set of rules. The fear began to set in. The Xithari didn't fear much. They were a species built on the idea of strength, of conquering what others feared. But this weapon, whatever it was, seemed to defy that concept. And that, more than anything, scared them. The reports from the research facility began to get more alarming. The object had begun to change. It was no longer just growing, it was adapting. It seemed to sense the environment around it, and it responded in ways no one could predict. At times it would shrink, and other times it would expand. Its surface would harden, only to soften again. It was as if it was testing its limits, learning, evolving. No one could figure out how it worked. And the longer they watched it, the more they began to understand that this was no ordinary weapon. It was alive in some way. And it was far more dangerous than anything the Xithari had ever seen. In the control room, high-ranking officials of the Xithari gathered. Their faces were stern, their minds focused. The news had spread quickly. The weapon had to be contained, studied, and controlled. But that was easier said than done. The scientists couldn't even begin to understand what they were dealing with. The military was on high alert, but no one knew how to neutralize this weapon. The one thing everyone could agree on was this: the weapon had to be destroyed before it could be used. But no one knew how. "What if it's already too late?" whispered one officer, looking at the growing mass in the containment chamber. "What if it's already begun its work?" The room fell silent. No one had an answer. The Xithari researchers, now fully aware of the weapon's potential, gathered in their highest security lab. The weapon, still in its inert form, lay under a thick glass container. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a simple plant. But to the Xithari, the reports had painted a different picture. They had learned that this wasn't just a biological organism, it was something far more complex, and something far more dangerous. The scientists, led by Commander Trixon and his team of military strategists, began to study the weapon with intense focus. They had tested everything their technology could throw at it. They tried to burn it, freeze it, slice it with lasers, and subject it to every kind of destructive force imaginable. But nothing had worked. The plant-like object remained unchanged, seemingly unaffected by any of their weapons. No matter how much energy or force they applied, it only absorbed it. It seemed to grow stronger with each test, its size subtly increasing, its appearance becoming more vibrant. There was something unsettling about it, a sense of life in it that they couldn't explain. Commander Trixon, a leader known for his cold and calculated approach, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. "It's adapting," he said, his voice sharp. "It's learning." His words lingered in the lab. The others looked at each other, unsure of what he meant. Could it really be true? Could this simple plant actually adapt to their attacks? The tests continued, each one more dangerous than the last. The weapon began to exhibit strange reactions. Small tendrils began to form, reaching out from the plant's base. They weren't physical tendrils, at least not in the way the Xithari understood physicality. They were like threads of energy, shifting in and out of existence. The researchers were stunned as the tendrils extended toward the lab walls, seemingly drawing in energy from the environment around it. It wasn't just growing, it was feeding off their technology, absorbing power like a sponge. As the tests continued, the weapon's true nature began to reveal itself. It wasn't just an object, it was a living force. A force that had been dormant for centuries, waiting to be awakened. The weapon, it seemed, had a mind of its own, and it wasn't something the Xithari could control. The military, ever eager to understand the weapon's destructive potential, pushed for more aggressive testing. They placed a small fleet of drones near the weapon, using them to probe its limits. The drones circled the object, sending out various forms of energy to trigger a response. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room. The weapon reacted almost immediately, not by attacking, but by manipulating the energy around it. The tendrils that had once been small and harmless were now wrapping around the drones. In seconds, they were disabled, their systems hijacked by an unknown force. The weapon had not only absorbed the drones' energy, it had taken control of them. The room fell silent. The military commanders exchanged uneasy glances. This isn't just a weapon," said one of the lead researchers, his voice trembling. "It's a living organism. It's not just using our technology, it's taking it." The implications were clear. The weapon was far more advanced than anything the Xithari had ever seen. It could not just destroy, it could manipulate, control, and even command. It wasn't bound by the laws of physics or technology. It was organic, but its intelligence was on a level the Xithari had never encountered before. They had no idea how to stop it, how to understand it, or even how to contain it. "We need to study it more," Commander Trixon insisted. His voice, usually confident, now sounded uncertain. "We need to learn everything about it." But the more they studied it, the more they realized they were dealing with something that could not be controlled. The weapon's power grew stronger with each passing hour. It seemed to have no limit. It was constantly changing, evolving, adapting to whatever the Xithari threw at it. Then, things began to take an even darker turn. As the days passed, the weapon began to affect the researchers themselves. It was subtle at first, an unexplained feeling of dizziness, strange dreams that felt too real, whispers in the back of their minds. At first, they dismissed it as stress. But as the days wore on, it became clear that something was wrong. Something about the weapon was influencing them in ways they couldn't explain. One of the researchers, a young scientist named Xithari, began to notice something strange. As she sat in front of the weapon, studying its growth, she felt a strange connection to it. At first, it seemed like just a mental lapse. She thought it was her imagination. But the more she focused, the more she realized that the weapon was not just a passive object. It was aware of her. It was trying to communicate with her. Xithari had no idea how this was possible. The weapon was not supposed to have any form of intelligence beyond what they had observed in the lab. But as she sat there, the strange connection between her and the plant grew stronger. Her heart raced. The whispers in her mind became clearer. The weapon wasn't just alive, it was conscious. It wasn't just reacting to its surroundings, it was responding to them, to the people around it. It was learning, growing, adapting in ways that defied all logic. And it was getting stronger by the minute. The more the researchers interacted with it, the more it seemed to develop. It wasn't just absorbing energy, it was absorbing knowledge. And it was beginning to change them, to shape them in ways that terrified Xithari and the others. Now it was clear to them all. They had awakened something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The weapon wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a force of nature, a force they couldn't control. And if they didn't find a way to stop it soon, they would all be at its mercy. As the Xithari scientists continued their experiments, the weapon's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. The more they pushed it, the more it resisted. It was like nothing they had ever encountered before. But even as they were starting to understand its power, they had no idea of the deeper truth behind its origin. They had underestimated the weapon, believing it to be a simple tool of destruction. They were wrong. The truth, once revealed, would shake their empire to its very core. After weeks of testing, strange data began to emerge from the weapon's interactions with the Xithari technology. The researchers had tried everything: laser beams, high-frequency pulses, intense heat, and even biological toxins. But each time, the weapon only responded by growing stronger. It seemed as though the more they attacked it, the more it changed. The team noticed that it was no longer reacting to the tests in the way they expected. There were patterns in the growth, subtle movements, like the plant was evolving right in front of them. But the real shock came when the weapon began to emit a low, humming sound. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, but soon it grew louder. It was a sound that seemed to come from deep within the weapon itself, not from any external source. And that's when the scientists made their first truly horrifying discovery. Commander Trixon and his team had been analyzing the data from the weapon when a breakthrough occurred. They discovered an ancient symbol carved into the surface of the plant-like organism, hidden deep within its fibers. It was a symbol unlike anything in the Xithari language, a pattern, ancient and long forgotten. It was something that had been etched into the weapon structure. The symbol was unmistakable, and when Trixon saw it, his blood ran cold. He knew immediately what it meant. The weapon wasn't of Xithari origin at all. It was older, far older. It had been crafted by a race that existed long before the Xithari rose to power. The symbol matched a set of ancient markings found in ruins scattered across the galaxy, ruins of a civilization that had long since vanished. a species called the Nyrox, who had once been considered one of the most powerful races to ever exist. They were said to have mastered the natural world in ways that defied the understanding of the Xithari. They were biologists, engineers, and chemists who could shape nature itself. But the Nyrox had disappeared without a trace centuries ago. The Xithari had always assumed they had fallen to some form of self-destruction or a failed experiment. But now they realized they had been wrong. The Nyrox hadn't destroyed themselves. They had created something far more dangerous. The weapon was part of their legacy. At first, the Xithari refused to believe it. How could a simple plant be the product of such an advanced species? But the more they studied it, the more the truth became undeniable. The Nyrox had designed this weapon as a way to control the very fabric of life. It wasn't just a tool for war. It was a living organism that could alter its environment, adapt to threats, and evolve over time. It was a biological weapon that could be used to conquer worlds without firing a single shot. Then came the real shock. As the Xithari team continued their research, the weapon began to shift again. This time, the changes were more pronounced. The tendrils that had once seemed harmless now began to extend further, spreading across the lab. The plant wasn't just reacting to their attacks anymore. It was actively changing the environment around it. The air became thicker, the atmosphere heavy. It was as if the very space within the lab was being altered by the weapon. The team watched in disbelief as the plant-like organism grew at an accelerated rate, its tendrils reaching out to consume anything in its path. Then it happened. The lab systems, once under the control of the Xithari, suddenly went dark. The lights flickered, the computers shut down, and the doors sealed themselves shut. Panic spread among the team. They had no control. The plant had taken over. It had learned to manipulate the technology, just as it had adapted to their attacks. Commander Trixon, who had once been so confident in their superiority, found himself at a loss. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. The Xithari were supposed to be the most powerful force in the galaxy. But now they were helpless. A simple plant, grown from the soil of an ancient world, had brought their entire empire to the brink of collapse. What had they unleashed? The weapon was no longer just an artifact from an old civilization. It was a living, breathing force. And it had one purpose: to consume, to grow, to evolve. It could not be stopped by traditional means, and its power was growing stronger by the second. The Xithari were now in a race against time. They needed to figure out how to control the weapon before it consumed everything in its path. But how could they control something that seemed to defy all the rules of science, of technology, and of nature itself? The weapon had already begun to spread beyond the confines of the lab, infecting the rest of the facility. It had found a way to adapt to the environment. And as it did, it grew more and more unpredictable. Commander Trixon ordered a full evacuation of the research facility. But it was too late. The plant had already breached the containment zones. The walls of the facility were no longer safe. The plant had infiltrated the air ducts, the power systems, and the very walls of the building. It had spread, and there was no stopping it now. The Xithari's most powerful weapon had turned on them. Their empire, built on technology and control, was at the mercy of an ancient force of nature. What had begun as a simple discovery had now become a nightmare. The Xithari, once the rulers of the galaxy, now found themselves struggling to survive against a force they could not understand and could not stop. They had no choice but to face the terrifying truth. They had unleashed something far beyond their control. The weapon was no longer just a threat. It was the beginning of the end. As the realization of the weapon's true nature sank in, the Xithari were left in stunned silence. What had begun as a simple discovery had turned into something far beyond their control. The weapon was no longer just a strange artifact. It was alive, it was intelligent, and it was far older than anything the Xithari had ever known. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a living organism with a mind of its own, capable of responding to its environment in ways that defied all logic. The symbol etched into the surface of the weapon wasn't just an ancient mark, it was a key. A key that opened a door to the weapon's origin. Through their research, the Xithari had uncovered the most shocking truth of all. The weapon wasn't created by any alien species. It wasn't the product of advanced technology or scientific knowledge. The weapon had been born out of a forgotten, primal force. It was a creation of nature itself, an ancient, living organism designed for one purpose: destruction. Far beyond the reaches of the Xithari Empire, hidden on a long-abandoned planet, this weapon had been cultivated centuries ago by a lost civilization. A civilization that had understood nature in ways the Xithari could never have imagined. They had tapped into the forces of life itself, using the raw power of the planet's ecosystem to create a weapon that was both alive and deadly. And then, for reasons unknown, they had left it behind, buried in the ruins of their civilization. The weapon was never meant to be discovered. It had been hidden away, forgotten by time, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, that moment had arrived. The Xithari, in their arrogance, had stumbled upon it, and they had awakened it. Over the course of the next few days, as the researchers continued to study the weapon, they began to notice something even more terrifying. The weapon wasn't just reacting to the tests. It was adapting to the Xithari themselves. Their technology, their weapons, their military might, it all seemed insignificant to the weapon. It was as if the weapon was learning from them, absorbing their tactics, their strategies, and evolving faster than they could comprehend. The plant-like organism seemed to pulse with life, growing more intricate and more dangerous with each passing hour. The team tried to contain it, to restrict its growth, but every attempt only seemed to make it stronger. The weapon wasn't just alive. It was learning, changing, and growing in ways that no one could predict. And then the unthinkable happened. During one of the final tests, the weapon, now fully grown and pulsing with energy, released a burst of energy unlike anything the Xithari had ever seen. The shockwave from the blast was so powerful that it shook the entire facility, knocking out communications and sending the researchers scrambling for cover. In that moment, the Xithari realized that they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated the weapon's power, its intelligence, and its potential. It was not a tool they could control. It was a force of nature, beyond anything they had ever known. The researchers, now fully aware of the weapon's capabilities, could only watch in horror as it continued to grow. It was as if the weapon had become aware of them, aware of their presence, and it was ready to strike back. The Xithari, the most powerful species in the galaxy, had made a terrible discovery. They had found a weapon so powerful, so unpredictable, that it could bring even their empire to its knees. Now the question was no longer how to control the weapon but how to stop it. The Xithari Empire, once unbeatable, now faced the greatest challenge of its existence. They had unlocked something they couldn't understand, something they couldn't control. The weapon had awakened, and with it, a new era of uncertainty had begun. An era where the line between nature and technology, life and destruction, was no longer clear. As the weapon continued to pulse with energy, growing stronger with each passing moment, the Empire's most brilliant minds scrambled to find a way to contain it, to understand it. But deep down they knew that this weapon, this ancient force of nature, could never truly be controlled. It had no masters. It had no creators. It had no end. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, was no longer in the hands of the Xithari. And as the weapon's power continued to rise, one thing became certain. The true rulers of the galaxy were not those with the most advanced technology, but those who understood the raw, uncontrollable force of nature itself. And the Xithari would soon learn the hard way that some forces were never meant to be controlled. As the weapon continued to grow, adapting to every attempt to control it, one question lingered in the air. Could the Xithari harness its power, or had they unleashed something they could never contain? What was the true cost of discovering something this dangerous? And more importantly, Who else in the galaxy would learn of it? The fate of the Xithari Empire, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on how they handled this discovery. Would they attempt to replicate the weapon's terrifying power for their own use, or would they be the next civilization to fall victim to its ancient, unstoppable force? The answer is still unclear, and the weapon's true potential remains a mystery, one that might one day be unlocked by someone else. You've just seen how the pursuit of power unchecked by understanding can lead to unforeseen consequences. The Xithari thought they controlled everything, but they learned the hard way that some forces in the universe cannot be tamed. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more about the mysteries of the universe, the consequences of unchecked power, and the secrets hidden away by time itself, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think would happen if the Xithari were to lose control of this weapon? And don't forget to share this story with others who love science fiction and the unknown. Stay tuned for more stories, and remember, some mysteries are better left undiscovered.